Hey there, everybody. How are you guys tonight? I want to thank everyone for stopping by my channel here, The Magical Solution. I'm really excited because I have an amazing guest, Coby Michaels. He is an author of this amazing book, The Poison Path Herbal. And I'm so excited to be speaking with him tonight because this subject I feel is one of the subjects that is sort of taboo and doesn't get spoken about a lot in many circles. And I think it's an opportunity to really explore this subject more deeper than just, baneful herbs in magic or baneful herbs in, ritual. It's an opportunity for us to see where else these plants can take us tonight. And so, I wanna have a conversation with Coby. So let's get to know Coby a little bit. He is a lifelong student interested in religion, folklore, and magic practices. Having studied religion at Arizona State University, Coby has a diverse background in history and human spirituality. He is a contributing writer for Patheos Pagan and the House of Twigs, and is currently publishing his first book, that's this guy right here, combining alchemy, herbalism, and magical practice with the poison plant lore. Coby self-published his first writings on this topic in 2017, and he teaches a variety of workshops on the history, science, and folklore of poisonous plants. Brought up in the garden, he has a strong affinity for plant-based practices and has worked with baneful herbs for nearly a decade. His studies are focused on ethnology, ethnobotany, and esoteric herbalism through the lens of traditional witchcraft and folk magic. So have your questions ready and let's bring Coby in. But before we do, I have to give one more disclaimer, okay? In the beginning of this book, pretty much right at the very first page, there is a section that talks about, the toxicity of these herbs, talks about how you need to make sure that you are consulting a physician before doing anything, that you make sure that you are being safe with regards to wearing gloves, eyewear, all that. And to also make sure that if you're going to embark on this path, you're doing so at your own risk. So I definitely want to make sure that tonight you know that, and that the plant that we will be discussing tonight is not in advertisement of these plants, but for educational purposes only. So let's bring Coby in. Hey,
Hello, LAILANI. Hi.
welcome to This Is How We Grow. How you doing tonight?
Thank you. I'm really good. I'm really excited to be here, excited to talk to you. I probably won't stop smiling for a few minutes, so.
Do it. That's the vibe. That's the vibe, bro. You have a lot of friends. Like this chat immediately just boom, 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 boom started coming in. So you
Good.
are beloved for sure. Um, so let's kick it off. Let's kick this off because we only have an hour and there's so much juicy stuff to talk about. There really is. Um, so the first thing I kind of want to get out of the way, now you've said it a million times in all your other podcasts, but how and why with this book? Really quick.
How and why? So the book, I had collected a whole bunch of information researching these plants. They were just something I was very passionate about, and just sort of dove into the mythology and folklore of poisonous plants, intoxicating herbs, all of these plants that are sort of on the periphery and looked at as a little bit dangerous or a little bit taboo. And I had compiled all of this stuff, and started to realize that there was a growing community, kind of developing. And so then thought, like, I'm going to try and write this book and try and share, the things that I've pieced together from all of these different sources, and present it to people in a way that they can use the information to enhance their own practices, or to start new on the poison path, understanding what it is and why somebody would practice it, what makes it beneficial, what makes it different, all of that.
Yeah, okay. So I have to admit, I'm very new when it comes to, like, I'm a novice when it comes to, Western traditional esoteric practices and witchcraft and magic. I'm more so of like the Latin American and Caribbean side. And so when I was kind of combing through your book, when I was going through it, I was really pleased to actually see that when you talk about the history of these plants, when you talk about, how baneful plants are kind of used around the world, you included a lot of that. Like you talked about Egypt and Africa, you talked about the Middle East, you talked about all of these places and the specific baneful plants that are in those local areas and how they use them in those times. So I was really super like impressed by that and appreciated that so much because it wasn't just like a one-sided view, of these plants.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic, and it's a global practice. There's people that are working with poisonous plants or practicing the poison path, and they might not even really be aware that that's what they're doing. Because it is so broad and touches on so many different areas. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, you mentioned that in your book, like you made it very clear that this idea of ethnogens, this kind of larger subject of ethnogens, which I'll definitely have you explain what that is briefly, but that how it incorporates so many different categories, that it isn't just toxic plants or isn't just poisonous or isn't just hallucinogens. Like there are so many like subcategories in that subject that really made me think, because when you think of ethnogens, immediately you think of psychedelics, or you think of, something that could potentially kill you at the touch of a hand. But you really made it a point to be like, no, 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 it's much more complex than that. There's more nuance to that. And I would love for you to kind of explain just a little bit of that for us. Like, what is an ethnogen, and can you explain some of those categories that are outside of poisonous and psychedelic?
Yeah, definitely. So an entheogen literally means to generate the divine within. So to kind of awaken the divine part of yourself, if you're looking at it that way, or to connect to kind of a divine agency that's outside of yourself, but bring that into your presence so that you're communing with that energy and working with that energy. So entheogen is to bring the divine within, and they're simply plants that alter consciousness in ways that kind of facilitate spiritual experiences. And we know there's all different sorts of shamanic techniques and trance-inducing techniques and meditation that can kind of get us into that altered state of mind. Some of them are more excitatory, so moving, dancing, drumming, getting the blood pumping, very, very active. Others are more inward, more passive, more stillness, more meditation, or even exposure to cold or heat, different temperature changes and things like that are all to alter consciousness. So we've got all of these different kind of levels of consciousness that we're able to access. And then we've got all of these different plants that are available as well that can help us to access those different levels of consciousness. So for example, poison path is kind of an umbrella term. Cannabis could be considered a poison path herb.
Okay.
Tobacco would be considered a poison path herb. We typically think of things like wolfsbane and deadly nightshade and poison hemlock and stuff that sounds very dangerous and very, very poisonous, but there are a lot of other different plants that create these changes in consciousness that don't have that risky element to it. And it's kind of approaching it from that perspective, as far as what is the ritual that I'm about to do, or what am I looking to get out of this. And then you can kind of match the state of consciousness to the working that you're trying to do. So you're not always going to be taking a bunch of mushrooms and having this really intense psychedelic trip every time you read tarot for somebody. But you might drink some blue lotus tea, you might put mugwort essential oil on your skin. All of those things are facilitating changes in consciousness, both chemically, spiritually, and energetically. And we can use that to kind of enhance the state of mind that we need to be in when we're doing these different practices.
So really, the poison path is looking at these plants not so much as whether or not, they can kill you or whether or not you can use them in offensive magic, but more so, do they shift consciousness? Do they move your spirit from one state to the next?
Mm-hmm.
And that helps it to be categorized as a poison path plant?
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of, the baneful herbs, the more sinister herbs, the more dangerous ones are definitely part of the poison path. And the poison path in particular may be a little bit more focused on those herbs as well. Those are also the herbs typically associated more with European practices, European witchcraft, European pagan traditions, and things like that. And of course, other areas, surrounding in the Middle East, where we have like mandrake and henbane and things like that were used, and even in Egypt and things like that. But they're really associated with that area. But we've got all of these other botanical allies available too. So the poison path is maybe at first glance a little bit more Eurocentric, a little bit more associated with that traditional witchcraft or medieval witchcraft. At least that was kind of the gateway to me for it. But then you find this whole other side when you actually start looking into the entheogenic components and
Yes.
finding all of this indigenous knowledge that has been, maintained all of these different thousands of years, and all of these people practicing various shamanic practices, and all of the similarities in the experiences and the similarities in, their description of like where this information is coming from that they're coming back with. And, from different parts of the world, all of these shaman, they have the same reply, in that it's coming directly from the plants.
The plant, yup.
Yeah.
The spirit of the plant. And you touched on that in the book too, how like around the world in a lot of these indigenous practices, they anthropomorphized these plants, and things like, mandrake or angelica root or high john were looked at, as people, like almost like little spirits that
Mhm.
they had to take care of and made sure that they, gave offering to, and made sure that they passed down from family to family, um, so that they can work for their family and give blessings to their family. So it isn't just, it's a relationship, I think is the right way of saying it, versus just, you give an offering to a plant so the plant can do something for you. It's not just an exchange, but a relationship. And you talk about that in your book. You talk about ritual and relationship being a primary part of working with these plants. And you do a great job sort of, you know, giving some rituals, giving some uh, not dosages, but like some formularies, giving some ideas of how you can build these relationships and how you can have these rituals with these plants. It's a phenomenal book. I have to tip my hat to you for real. And like the way that you wrote it too, it was written in a way where it's almost like biblical in the sense that you gave each part of your holy trinity, of your threefold cosmology, like biblical, like their own book, a book of Saturn, a book of Mercury, a book of Venus.
Aw.
And it was just like, yes, like this is so cool. And I don't want to give it away. I don't want to give away all the juicy stuff. I want people to buy it so they can see it for
Yeah,
themselves. But I just have to be like, that was just so cool. You know what I mean? One of the things that I was curious about though, when you spoke about the indigenous practices, the shamanic practices, and how they really talk about the spirit of the plant and giving them these messages, you also did a really great job kind of talking about the role of these plants throughout history. So like you talk about it in terms of spirituality, then you get into how they were used in politics, then you get into how they were used in war, then you get into how they're used in medicinal like you really went through the whole shebang. And I'm just curious, as you were going through this process of writing this and researching all of this, was there any one particular part that like really stood out to you that you said to yourself, you know what, I want to expand on this idea and maybe do like another book, but just on this specific part of it?
absolutely. Yeah. So you mentioned, the history and that. And when we look at toxicology, the history of poison, the history of medicinal plants, and plants that are very, very potent, um, and I do that thing where I lose my train of thought again. But
I'm the same way.
Looking at the history of it and realizing just how intimately it's really been connected with human development from the earliest of days in activating and expanding consciousness to influencing the political powers at the time, to then kind of being turned around and being used to demonize other people, to demonize traditional herbal knowledge through the witch trials, and then even getting into like the war on drugs, which is essentially very similar to what was happening in the Middle Ages with the witch trials, when a lot of this natural medicine was really being demonized. So the history to me is what's most fascinating, and the relationships that people have had with the plants throughout history are kind of keys to how we can work with them, how we can sort of fill in some of the blanks. So one area that I'm really fascinated in, that's kind of my little pet area that I save notes on it and just compiling things, is poison magic, or beneficium, which is a lot of different things, but just kind of thinking of it as using poison as an energetic concept or an energetic force. Like life force or love or any of the different emotions. A lot of times people describe toxic individuals or toxic situations. So poison has a very material, kind of tangible force and characteristic about it, and it evokes very powerful emotions, and kind of using those baneful properties or those taboo properties or things that make a plant dangerous, and kind of tweaking them a little bit and turning them into more so a source of power or a source of protection or healing or medicine. So kind of turning and twisting that idea of poison and using it in ways that it can work for us beneficially.
Yes. Now, are you looking into sort of that more so from the magical aspect or like the medicinal aspect? Like, because I feel like, especially nowadays, we're seeing a lot of crossover in our
Mm-hmm.
medicine with regards to energy work. Like, you're seeing Reiki healers in the hospitals now. You're seeing nurses using aromatherapy. You're seeing, you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of crossover. People are
Mm-hmm.
really starting to understand the spiritual importance of healing a person's physical body. And I'm wondering, like, are you also kind of approaching it from like sort of like that holistic standpoint as well, or is it just magical?
It seems to be like that's kind of the direction it's taken, or that's just how it kind of is. And initially my main interest was more in the magical realm, and then needing to use the plants safely and know how to use them, I had to become more versed in kind of the physical chemical aspect of it. So you can't really talk about poison history or poison and magic without sort of going into then the potential that it has for spiritual and emotional healing and all of these other things. And there's just so many people that can be helped by it, and there's so many different options out there for different types of healing, for promoting different types of wellness, creating different cathartic situations through working with different potent plants and things like that, that I feel like it would be a disservice not to talk about the healing and things like that. As much as I would love to just talk about, Catherine de Medici and the affair of poisons and things like that, because it's just such a sordid, dramatic history, that it all translates into this is how we can use them to help ourselves, to help other people, and to help the world, help the earth too.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially since when you're looking at it as a plant spirit, you're not just looking at the root or the stem or the leaf. You're looking at the totality of it.
Mhm.
And every bit of that plant has different purposes, may have different potencies, different chemical makeup entirely, from the flower to the seed all the way down to the root. So, you know, you're right. It would be a disservice if you're working with these plants and not understanding its physical effects and how it can help us physically. I mean, first of all, not knowing that information can cause death. Let's be real. You need to know what plants you can physically touch and which ones you cannot, to potentially save your life. So like you can't learn these things without learning its effects on the body and its holistic medicine. And you know, I think it would also do us a disservice to not understand how these quote unquote psychedelics, how these entheogens can also help with regards to mental health. I mean, it's easy to say, okay, you have a scar, let's use it for this, or oh, you have, but like also potentially using it for if you have depression or if you have anxiety or if you suffer from schizophrenia. And have you stumbled upon that research? Have you looked into that at all?
Yeah, that's a huge part of it. I mean, you have different categories of plants that are capable of different things. So, more the nightshades, or used in topical pain relievers and flying ointments and things like that. But that's sort of a different animal from more traditional psychedelic fungi and things like that. But that's really where these plants really shine through, is in helping with mental health, helping with emotional things, with spiritual things. They help on that more subtle level. um, in working with any of these plants at a micro dose amount, you will notice healing, proper healing benefits, different changes in thought process. Even something like just anointing yourself with some oil every day. You're still getting very, very minute amounts of that plant material. And that's essentially what's being done in homeopathic medicine, is that the amounts are just very minute, but it's still active. They're very potent. So we're
Yeah.
still getting those benefits.
Yeah, and it's funny because you go on social media, all these different platforms, especially when you're dealing with like people in their early 20s. There's a lot of buzzwords going around with regards to trauma and with regards to mental health. And these buzzwords are things like shadow work. And the way that it's being spoken about right now, shadow work, it's almost as if it's like a thing that you do versus the side of you that just needs expression.
Mm-hmm.
And versus like looking at it in terms of what Carl Jung actually meant by it versus what we're seeing now and how it's being utilized. And I feel like, again, when we talk about these plants, it's another opportunity to talk about how we can dive deeper and really explore this idea of shadow work from this perspective, because I think doing it alone, and I'm not saying that you can't do it alone, you could do it with a therapist, you can do it alone, but doing it with these plants as well can also add a deeper element, I think. I don't know what your opinion on that would be.
Yeah, absolutely. Regardless of the type of shadow work, or the topic or different themes that you're working through, there's a plant out there that has a a common synergy to that. And a lot of the poisonous plants are plants that have a synergy with some of the more difficult things that human beings will go through in life, and death, loneliness, separation, fear of loss, our own mortality, um, and even getting into things like sexual trauma, mental illness, depression, things like that. There is a plant that kind of matches that and will act supportively when you're going through those different things, or it will help to kind of kickstart the process or get things going, because it's in synergy kind of with that really just Saturnian work of kind of breaking everything down. It's a type of shamanic death or ego death. And
Mm.
poisonous plants are very intimately connected to the energy of life and death. So when we kind of work with them in that capacity, they can facilitate these types of experiences, and they're not generally types of experiences that you would seek out or that you would want to have. A death in the family, or some major traumatic kind of life-changing event. It may be helpful and it may be healing and help you to progress down the road, but it's going to be a very traumatic experience. So having different plant allies, whether it's flower essences or whatever it may be, to kind of act supportively through that, is how you benefit from using poisonous plants in shadow work.
So I like that you use the word synergy, because in your book, you do make it very clear that what's good for the goose may not always be good for the gander. In that, these plants, although there may be some standardization in terms of what they may, for the most part, be good for, a sedative, what's the opposite of sedative? I'm sorry, stimulant. But that's not necessarily universal across the board with all people. And I love that you said that, because it goes to show that dosages are going to vary between people. It's going to show that plants themselves, the plant spirits, the plant allies that you talk about, are going to vary from person to person. This idea of the synergy, this idea of, well, for you to bring forth this particular ego aspect of yourself that needs to be addressed, this plant may be good for you, versus for the next person that might bring out a different ego self that you need to address. And so it's not universal. I think that's where spirit and science kind of toe the line, and where a good healer is so important in this process. Because this is a person that has to do an assessment of what your energetic synergy with these plants would be, in order to then work with the physical dosages and things like that. It's amazing. It's amazing. Now, have you come across, like, so for example, cannabis? And I know there's different types of cannabis, and I understand that overall you have some types that are like sedatives and some that are a little bit more stimulant. But, like, let's say you have two people who take the same one that's meant to be sedative, and for one person, they are functioning. They can go to work, they can drive a car, they can go grocery shopping, they can write articles. They can take this particular drug and be fine. Whereas with the other person, it brings about a sense of doom, and it brings about a sense of anxiety, and it causes so much internal turbulence. I think that's a perfect example of what we're talking about here. Now, do you think, just on your opinion and just based on your research, do you think that might be an issue with synergy? Do you think that that's an issue with not building a ritualistic relationship with the plant? Do you think it's more just medical, like, possibly? Like, what's your opinion on that? Or a combination of all of that stuff?
So I think that people are kind of trying to avoid this negative experience or becoming ill or something like that. I mean, definitely we don't want to ingest poison hemlock. We don't want to, do things that are going to, without a doubt, put us in the hospital or, potentially kill us. But there are certain ones that we can work with in this way that I'm losing my train. So I'm looking down. So it's going to bring up the different things that need to come up within that person. That could include, a period of anxiety, paranoia, what would be categorized as a bad trip. And that really relates to the different fears and anxieties and things that already exist within that person. The environment plays a role. It plays a role in who else is around you, and entering into it in a ritualistic way and a ritualistic mindset is kind of a spiritual safeguard that sort of helps to set the direction for the journey.
Yes.
But it's not to say that, you're not going to puke your guts out if you, drink ayahuasca. There's a major purging, and that physical purging is a cognate to the energetic and spiritual purging and healing that's occurring. So you have to go sort of through that very negative physical process first to kind of get to the healing at the end of it.
I have a great question here from Stephen Salinas. He says, in his tradition that he was brought up in, they believe that the soil also determines how something functions, how a plant functions. And I think you actually brought that up in your book when you were talking about the alkaloids of a plant, and how some of them, it is based on, like, the kind of soil, the alkalinity of the soil and stuff like that. But please elaborate, because I am not the person.
Yeah, absolutely. So The soil does have a major influence on the alkaloid content. So looking at the soil moisture, the various other chemicals in the soil, those all kind of contribute to the alkaloid content in the plant. With a lot of these plants, kind of the more stress that they're under, the more alkaloids that they tend to produce. So extremely dry, extremely hot, a lot of times the alkaloids will spike up, sort of like a defense mechanism for insect predation and things like that. So they really can vary from plant to plant, from leaf to leaf on the same plant. You could plant one datura plant over here and then plant another one, 600 yard, not even that far, 6 feet away, and they have totally different concentrations when it comes to the alkaloid content. Now, in certain plants, the soil will also kind of influence the effects in, depending on the plant, kind of the direction that it's going to go, because some plants can act in more of a stimulating way, some can act in more of a depressant way. So it's going to kind of push it one way or the other, when it comes to the actual effects. But the concentration of alkaloids is also affected for sure.
So just briefly, can you explain what an alkaloid is and what it is for a plant?
Yeah, so alkaloids are just the active constituent, and there's many different active constituents in a plant. The alkaloids are typically going to have the psychoactive qualities. So caffeine is an alkaloid, cocaine is an alkaloid, nicotine is an alkaloid. There's a bunch of other ones. So they're just these chemicals that have a very pronounced effect on our neurochemistry.
So the tougher the environment for which it grows, the stronger the alkaloid?
Yeah, so for certain nightshades, belladonna, datura, when they don't get enough water, or say you plant a plant on the southern side of your house instead of the northern side of your house, that extra kind of stress is going to cause it to produce more of those alkaloids. And that's not something that I can't test that. I don't have a laboratory to, really test that. But, in my reading, that's what I've seen, that insect predation, so bugs eating at the plant and, not having enough water or too much sunlight, too much heat will cause them to kind of overproduce.
And that soil really plays that huge part in that alkaloid production. So
Yeah,
even if all of the external circumstances are crap, if they can get some good roots in there, if they can get what they need to get from that soil, they can still make it. They can still do the thing. That's so cool. That's so cool. Oh, someone is actually talking about your group. So Joanne, the Poisoners Apothecary discussion group. Coby's group on Facebook, Poisonate Plant Enthusiasts Exploring Baneful Herbs through, what is that? Cytochemistry?
Yes.
History, folklore, and ethnology. This is the community page connected to Poisoners Apothecary. So yes, make sure you guys follow that. Those of you who are on Facebook, I'm definitely going to join now because I did not know that was a thing.
Yeah, it's an awesome group. Thanks, Joanne, for sharing that. I appreciate it.
That's awesome. Thank you. So, I'm actually really, really surprised that we got through as much as we went through in such a short period of time. So I guess what I can ask you now is, before we sort of wrap up and you kind of tell people how to contact you and tell people what your next upcoming events and things are, this book, The Poison Path Herbal, of everything that you put in this book, if a reader could walk away with nothing else, what would you want them to walk away with after having read this book? Ooh, that was a good one.
On a practical level, I would want them to be able to walk away with a comfortable understanding and, the basic tools to start working with these plants on a physical level and actually making different formulas, to use them for various ritual purposes. Having that understanding is very important and was a big part of the book in getting that information out there, but really too just understanding that poison does not mean death. It does not ultimately equate to death. Poison essentially means potency. And that all comes down to the dose. And the very same chemicals that make a plant poisonous are also what can make it medicinal if used properly.
Perfect. Perfect. So, Coby, tell everyone what you're going to be up to, any future plans that you might want to let people know about. How can they contact you in the future?
Yeah, so you can reach me, the Poisoner's Apothecary at gmail.com if you have any questions or looking for any resources. Also, my website, thepoisonersapothecary.com, where you'll find all of the different formulas and herbal accoutrement that I sell. But in addition to that, there's also a lot of information and articles, pertaining to the poison path and the study of these plants. You can also find my articles on my blog on Patheos Pagan. So there's a lot of material saved in there. And what am I working on?
You teaching any classes? Are you going to do any classes?
So I've got a couple up that are recorded classes, previous ones that I've done. Actually thinking about redoing a couple of those. I might do the poison magic class again live, but I'm actually working on putting together a virtual conference. Botanica Obscura is what it's going to be called, and it's going to be an online conference of various presentations from different herbalists, spiritual practitioners, ethnobotanists, just all pertaining to plants that are poisonous, unique, carnivorous, odd, exotic, just all of the cool ones. So that'll be the spring equinox is when that's happening.
All right, so I'll make sure to keep an eye out for that and make sure to throw some advertisements for that out there for you for sure.
Thank you.
We have one last question for you here from Stephen. Any suggestions on planting plants that are not native to your land that you are planting in? Any suggestions on how to go about doing that?
As far as
making sure that they survive since they're not native to where you are. I would think probably just indoor, keeping them indoor, right?
Standpoint, certain plant, like here in Florida, I have the benefit of being able to grow all year round because it's very warm outside. But also, if I plant some of these plants outside, like the humidity is just going to destroy them. The heat's going to be too much for them. The soil might be too sandy for some of them. Maybe not the mandrake or the henbane, but with those, they're not going to do well in the tropical Florida weather either. So that plays a big component, whether the area is going to be temperate or not. A lot of people are growing different poisonous plants and bringing things like datura, deadly nightshade, foxglove, maybe to areas where they're not necessarily native. So maybe there's a concern that one day there's going to be all of these poisonous plants growing all over the place. But nightshades occur very prolifically, and they're already all around us.
Yeah, I think you mentioned tomatoes, potatoes. That those are nightshades.
Yeah, tomatoes.
So potatoes. There you go. It's true. I think if you look up some of these categories of plants considered quote unquote poisonous plants, you'll see that we have them. We have our versions of them in whatever area you're living in, which is so cool. So cool. Coby, how can people oh no, we did that with your website and everything. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't want to repeat the question, but Coby, thank you so much for tonight. Like, this was so informative. I'm shocked that we were able to get all those questions in. You're so concise and so good at this.
Well, thank you. Yeah, not too much sometimes.
No, it was awesome. So I just want to give a huge shout out to all the people that came in. We had a Creature of Legend, Tyrone, Omira, of course, Stephen. We had Rob in here, your friend Joanne, and everyone else who is watching but didn't want to comment, and everyone else who will be watching the replay. Thank you guys so much. Make sure you join us every Sunday. I'll have someone new talking about something great, and I was just so honored to have you here today. Thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you. It's really been a pleasure. I enjoy talking to you.
We'll got to do it again sometime because I can already tell this is not going to be the last I hear of you.
Yeah, absolutely. Hit
For
me
sure.
up.
All right, guys, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and definitely share. This is the kind of stuff that helps to build community, knowledge, and of course, this is how we grow. I'm LAILANI, and this is The Magickal Solution. Have a great night, everyone. Bye.